Gaga.
And I am Emily May. We are so glad you are joining us for this conversation. This series is about pausing in the middle of this difficult cultural moment that we are in and asking, how do we respond with humanity instead of harm?
So every episode we talk about real issues that are affecting our communities, and we invite leaders doing powerful work to help us unpack them. Today's conversation is about how to lead conversations across differences. Because right now it can feel like everyone is talking, but not really listening. And so, Emily, we're going to be joined today by Erin Maz. We're going to Maz Mazursky from the organization Over Zero.
I am so excited about this. Maz is a long, dear friend of mine, and has been working with Right to Be in various consultant capacities and as a friend and, lover of social justice for probably over 15 years or so now. And Erin is now the, head of Over Zero. So Over Zero, if you have not heard of them, it's actually working to prevent political and identity-based violence, a big topic in this moment, right? By building resiliency networks across the country at national and local levels. They are bringing people together across differences and giving them the tools and frameworks to prevent, reduce, and diffuse conflict and polarization. So I'm really excited for us to talk to Maz. But before we dive in, Jorge, let's get started by grounding ourselves in what's really happening around us in this moment.
Okay, so right now, one of the biggest challenges many people feel is how divided our conversations have become. So, a 2025 Pew Research study found that more than half of Americans see both left-wing and right-wing extremism as major problems, and 85% say politically motivated violence is increasing.
That's a lot of people. That's a lot, right? And I think we all see it. And at the same time, we're seeing trust in our institutions is very, very low. Pew reports that only 17% of Americans say that they trust the federal government most of the time, which is actually one of the lowest levels ever recorded.
Yeah. So these tensions are also affecting people personally. So surveys show that about 4 in 10 Americans say politics has caused them significant stress in their lives. And researchers say incivility itself is becoming a public health issue. A 2025 civility survey found that 67% of Americans say uncivil behavior has negatively affected their mental health. And for young people, a 2025 Harvard Youth poll found that many young Americans feel growing political polarization and uncertainty have shattered trust in institutions and the future.
Yeah, absolutely. So the question becomes, right? How do we have conversations across differences that don't deepen division, but instead actually help us understand each other and to see each other better? And that is exactly why we are so excited to talk to Maz today from Over Zero.
So, Maz, for people who may not know Over Zero yet, can you tell us a little bit about your organization and what drew you to this work?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me. I'm honored to be your second guest. This is
Mhm.
really exciting. Um, so Over Zero is an organization that's been warning against hate speech and scapegoating for the better part of a decade. But we don't just talk about the ills of political and identity-based violence. We also work to build resilience um, to this types of violence and the underlying risk factors, which includes group targeted rhetoric, scapegoating, dangerous polarization, and now authoritarianism. We have developed tools and frameworks that help teach people the best way to prevent, reduce, and diffuse political violence. And we have found that the most effective way to help people use these tools is to build communities of trust, which is what we call resilience networks. We build resilience networks across the country by bringing leaders together across difference, folks who wouldn't necessarily know each other because they work in different sectors, have different ideologies, are from different places. But we bring them together around a simple idea that people should be able to safely participate in public life. And that grounding sort of belief actually opens up a lot of things. So.
Yeah, that's amazing, amazing work that you're doing. And in the context of this world that we are watching, which, Pew Research is showing it, but it also just feels more divided. It feels like viewpoints are getting increasingly more extreme. And what used to be far right rhetoric is actually becoming mainstream rhetoric. So, what does it mean to actually do this bridging work in 2026? And who still wants to bridge the difference, right? Who is out there being like, me, yes, I want to bridge difference. Sign me up in this moment.
Yeah. I mean, I will just say that it's true that sort of the hate speech and scapegoating has become more mainstream. And um, I think that we're being played. And I think that actually most people, if you really think about it, want something different. So people are maybe not raising their hands saying, yes, please sign me up to bridge against difference, because we have effectively in this society sort of dehumanized each other around our specific beliefs, you know? So if you believe um, in religious freedom and you believe in trans rights, like we think these people can't talk to each other. And we're finding that to actually not be true. And I think that the starting points are wrong. You know, I think we sometimes start from the wrong places of like, I need people to agree with me on this. And really, I think where we're headed is, and where we need to head is people just starting to recognize people as people again, that we are all multifaceted, complex, nuanced beings with sometimes competing beliefs and hypocrisies, all that, like we're all full of them. Um, and I think that when we can start centering each other's humanity, I joke that we're building sort of like team human, you know, we can start to see each other and those specific policy differences or issue differences actually start to fall away. There's this old sort of my background's in community organizing, and there's this old adage that our job as organizers is to bring people from anger to hope to action. And I think that we've missed a step, at least, in the hope, and that when we allow anger to fester, and I actually think most people are not taking action right now, most people are feeling quite paralyzed by everything that's happening. And when we allow anger to fester, bad things happen, right? And so what we need to do is actually move. Anger can be very productive for people, but it can also be very destructive. And I think that we're seeing anger being destructive. And so much of what we need to do is actually bringing people towards hope. And not seeing this work as actually bridging work, but I actually see this work as complete realignment of, you know, we are being told right now that your choice is Democrats or Republicans. Like, religion or agnostic, you know, like pick me, you know, man, woman, or queen, you know, like there's all of these things that we're being told we have to choose. And I think that when we get people in a room together to trust each other and build trust and actually just have real conversations, a lot of that starts to fall away, and you see an overall realignment in sort of not what's necessarily important, but in how you look at people.
Mm,
I love that.
yeah, yeah, thinking, and then not everything's like completely black and white, right? Like there has to be room for the middle. So, Mass, can you share with us when conversations break down across differences, what are some of the most common patterns that you see? And can you share the difference between communities that have made an effort to bridge differences, or like you said, do realignment work, and the communities that have not?
Yeah, I think there's two real things that I was thinking about when I heard this question. One is that I think there's a really important distinction that we need to make, because I think that I think people often think about the way that we talk to each other now and think that, and I think there's two things that are getting conflated. One is that there's being safe and then there's being in disagreement. And I think a lot of times we conflate those two things, that if somebody disagrees with you, you're inherently unsafe, or if somebody thinks something differently from you, you're inherently unsafe. And I think most of the time that's not true. You know, like just somebody may disagree with you. That may feel like an attack on yourself or in your identity. I've been in those situations myself. And that doesn't mean that somebody is getting ready to harm you, you know? And I think that the more that we are able to sit in discomfort with people disagreeing with us and maybe not even understanding us and who we are and what our identities mean, I think that the more we again start to see each other's humanity. Um, I also think the other thing is that when we come into conversations hoping to change someone's mind about a specific issue, and that it's so important that this is the thing that they think. And again, I think so much of this is actually stepping back and realizing that we're being polarized on purpose to be like, well, you either think this or this, and if you don't think this, then you're not on my team. And I really think that we need to challenge ourselves to come at this with more generosity, and more understanding of, and more curiosity of who is this person sitting next to me or sitting across from me, and why are they coming into that? Um, and I can give some actually, like, I think, well, I'll give some examples in a little bit, but I
Mhm.
think there's some really
Yeah.
good examples of how this has worked. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really interesting. And I think, your work is really focusing on how communication is powerful and transformative and not just shaping our relationships with each other. There's kind of this effect too of it's also shaping how, communities are showing up when hard things happen. And, I've heard from you, various examples of this. And so can you share with folks some of those examples? Because I think they're beautiful.
Yeah. So we work with resilience networks in a number of different states. One of them is Arizona, and I'm so proud of the work we do in Arizona. We have people, I mean, when I say we've brought people together across difference, we have we have really conservative faith leaders. We have folks who organize with Native and Indigenous populations. We have people who lead in the Mormon community. We have LGBTQ leaders, and they all have come together in this resilience network to better understand each other and also stand up against political and identity-based violence and be able to recognize when it's happening. And you can imagine that bringing this group of people together was pretty hard from the start because of where everybody is coming from. And and you would think that actually, like, maybe the LGBTQ folks are really sort of nervous about being in a room with super religiously conservative people. But actually, what we also found was that the religious conservative people were also really nervous about being in a room with more progressive people. They felt at the beginning like they couldn't share who they were, they couldn't share why their faith was important to them. They felt like they had to hide that. Um, and over the course of a year, and actually it was only like two meetings, I think, we were able to flip that,
Mm.
where the folks with more conservative religious backgrounds could actually share why that faith was important to them and why that faith was important in the collective work that what they were doing to stop violence together. And it took a little bit of trust building. It took a little bit of coming together around a common purpose. But they started to realize that they actually weren't that far apart and that they had really common goals. And so I think that's just a really key example of, it's about investing the time. I really think it's about getting people in person more, because it's easier online to just, dehumanize and see people as more
Yeah.
one-dimensional. And then it's about sort of helping people find commonality where they think there isn't any.
Yeah. You said something that stuck with me earlier. You were like, we've got the wrong starting place, right? We can't start from this position of, well, I believe this and you don't believe this, so you're wrong. And so my question is, when you bring people together in these rooms, like, what is the right starting place and how do you get them to actually start from there and not from their differences?
Yeah. I think that I came to this work, and I've been doing this work. I've been doing work at the intersection of community building and democracy for pretty much my whole career. I came to Over Zero in September, and I came with, I've a lot of my work historically was working with grassroots organizers in the global South who do a lot of anti-authoritarian and organizing. And so I've always seen sort of political violence as sort of a factor and sort of a symptom of a democratic backslide. And since I've been in this work, what I've realized is that's true. And when we don't have a common analysis that political and identity-based violence will literally tear communities and societies apart from the inside out if we allow it to fester in any way, which is why we started off this work dealing with hate speech and scapegoating in the first place, a decade ago, so that we hopefully wouldn't get to this current moment.
Right.
Um, that we, that we, if we don't have that starting point, then I think it's really hard to tackle everything else because, I mean, and you guys know this is your history too with At Right to Be. It's about safety, and that if people can't feel safe, then everything else that's fundamental to communities and societies falls away. And so I think that that is a really, really critical starting point. And I do think it's important that, again, like I think a lot of the hot button issues of our day don't create a lot of common ground and starting points. I think that we have to look towards the starting points that we do have. And I think that, again, for our work, political and identity-based violence creates the starting point of understanding how none of us can have any society if we allow this to continue. And so let's figure out how to come together. So I think that in order to be able to look towards a more positive future, which is another thing we're building, with our networks, we say, like, what does a resilient society look like? How do we build one that where everyone can thrive? And let's co-create that vision together. But in order to be able to look towards that future, we have to have some common analysis of what's wrong right now that we're trying to move away from. So
Mm-hmm. And I think you bring up an important point too of the difference between comfort and safety, right? Which can feel like two different things, especially if you're marginalized, right? Like discomfort can be like an indicator and can start sending signals to your brain like I am not physically safe, right? We are still sort of built as animals in that way. And also, I think to do this work, you have to accept some level of discomfort and override that animalistic desire to survive and bring out your big spear, just in case the animal attacks, right? Yeah.
yeah, for sure. I mean, it's really easy to dismiss people in that way, right? And I think that we're all learning every day. And I think to the credit of so many social justice folks that, we're even having these types of conversations that we're able to talk about identity in so many different ways. We're able to talk about um, gender in so many different ways. But what we're talking about is plurality, and plurality actually is far bigger than I think a lot of us want to believe. But that's not necessarily a bad thing, and I think that um, we can we can bring it together, essentially.
So our board member, Albert Fox Khan, right? We were in a call with him recently. We were actually talking about one of our upcoming Not Today series, and he said something that was pretty cool, which was, are we building bridges or are we building walkways across the bay on our islands, on our own islands? So, like, are we just preaching to the choir? And so, from a strategic perspective, if we want to build a more just and equitable world, should we focus on people who want to do the deep work and bridge difference? Or should we have a lighter touch and go to like a game together? Or maybe folks aren't ready to do anything more than, talk about a game. Um, but maybe in case, like, for example, in Emily's family, or her family at least, they would, say that we can be our gayest selves, right? Like she could feel comfortable being her gayest self, but she wouldn't necessarily feel that if it was somebody else. So what would you say, from a strategic perspective? How should we be engaging people across difference?
To be honest with you, I think that we need both. I think the deep work is really important because it helps people better understand who they are and where they stand.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that work's really important. I also think I think that we could be investing in what we call bridging work a little bit more. To me, I call it relationship building, trust building,
Mm,
resiliency work,
mm,
because I think that bridge building actually diminishes sort of it actually um, entertains the idea that there are two sides. And to me, I think there aren't. I think that we can't look at it as two sides. That is how I like to say that is how the haters have like constructed this, and I think that is that there's two sides.
Yeah.
And I there aren't two sides. There's so many more than two sides. And
mm,
one of the things that we think about is um, we work to cast a really wide, broad net, especially ideologically. But the question is sort of like, well, how far do you go in either direction? And the answer is as far as people are willing to go, right? Like if you are dead set on being in your own camp and like developing that and don't have an interest in talking to people outside of that, then it's probably not the work for you. But I actually
mm,
think that the more we create the space for more people to have these conversations, for more people to come together, and also to create a different narrative, that like and that rather than uplifting sort of the like absolute truths on social media, I think, what I'm seeing in a lot of ways is it's small, but it's there of like talking about the basics, and I don't mean this in a cheesy sort of anti-political way, but the compassion, the ability to see people in a number of different lights, the complexities. And I think there's a hunger for that because none of us want to be one-dimensional. None of us want to be seen as that one identity, the religious person, the gay person, the person from the South, whatever it is. Like, and Emily and I are both from the South, but like,
Yeah.
I say that with love. Um, you know, but I think that we none of us want that, right? And so, but sometimes we feel forced into it, and I think that the more we look outside of ourselves, the better. And I think people can do both. Like I definitely do both in the deepening and obviously in the broader conversations. So, I think it's really important, and I think that again, a lot of strategists make it an either or conversation, and we need to be in a land of abundance. It's usually and both.
Yeah.
So,
I
yeah.
mean, look, I'll be the first to say that there is no conversation on the planet that's going to get me to stop fighting for equity and justice and our collective liberation, right? However, I remain deeply curious about people who perceive themselves in some way in ideological opposition to me, because I actually think they probably aren't. I actually think they probably want to be free too, right? And so, and part of our collective liberation means it's not just liberation for me and my family and the queers that I met down the street, like it's liberation for all of us. It takes all
Yeah.
of us.
And I also think we've all learned a lot of skills over, I mean, it's incredible just over my lifetime, like how far we have come in, again, like, I never thought, like, I think back on like the early 2000 me that was like scared to hold another girl's hand in public to,
Yeah.
like in a major, in like Washington, D.C., to now where like I get to, I have marriage equality, and how far we've come even in that. And that is amazing. And obviously that's who I am, and that's really important. And I think that we've taught a lot of people about that intellectually, but I think that I think the next frontier is teaching people how curiosity, how to talk to each other, how to, like how to remain again, secure in yourself while also recognizing that yes, like what are you about? Like what is the freedom that you dream of? And it's probably not that far off. We just have really different visions of how we get there.
Yeah.
And that's okay. And the only way to sort of get closer is to talk to each other rather than, spewing things on social media and trying to win win that war or something, whatever
Yeah.
it is.
I
Yeah.
mean, that's a perfect transition to this next segment. We want to talk a little bit about how to do this thing, right? Not just why it's important or how somebody over there is doing the thing, but how you and I and all of us can do this thing. And so, at Right to Be, we've spent years facilitating conversations around identity and harm and belonging. And we do have a framework for how to have some conversations across difference, and in particular for folks interested in leading these conversations. So there's three pieces to it, and I'll walk through each and unpack each piece, but want to go ahead and let you know what they are. One is to set the stage. Then you want to create the container. And then if you do those two things right, you can very lightly facilitate, right? And a lot of people get scared of the facilitation side of the equation. But if you do the first two things right, chances are you're gonna be able to move through that last piece pretty easily. So let me unpack first, set the stage, right? Even before these conversations are happening across some level of difference, you want to take the time to let people know what's up, right? And as a facilitator, you want to start with yourself and asking yourself, like, who am I in this conversation? What is my role here? And what do I hope becomes possible through this dialogue that I am facilitating? What is the highest possible outcome here? And actually take a moment to like breathe through that, because it's so easy to disaster plan some of these conversations. But the reality is there's something gorgeous that could take hold here. So think about that. Right. And think about the internal space that you are bringing into the room to allow people to be with one another. Pause and ask yourself, how do I want to feel when this conversation is over? And what kind of experience do I want others to have? How do I want them to feel when they walk out of the room? And then, as you start to have conversations with people that you're bringing together across difference, like let them know, like what is the intention? What is this conversation going to be about? And if there's any kind of sensitive topics that might come up, let them know that too, so that people are really emotionally ready and not surprised or reactive. And then, right, once people are joining the conversation, this piece is key. You really have to create the container. And people say create the container. What kind of container? Like, am I making Tupperware? Like, what's going on with this container? We're not making Tupperware. That's for our next how-to session. But you want to make an environment where an honest dialogue is possible. Okay, so things like welcoming people when they're entering the room, making sure everybody feels seen and excited that you're excited that they're there, restating that intention at the beginning of the discussion, establishing clear norms for how people will engage. And some of these norms we usually talk about when we facilitate these conversations are speaking from your own experience. So saying, I think this, I did this, my experience is this, not you, right? Which can put people on their heels. Certainly being mindful to share that space so that people feel free to contribute. Honoring confidentiality so people can speak honestly without fear of being put on blast on social media. And reminding them to check in with themselves, right? When they're trying to win an argument, to be right, rather than to really hear or understand somebody. And broadly, we like to call this brave space because, is what we were talking about with Maz. There is no such thing necessarily as a purely safe space, but we want to be brave in these conversations. We want to be brave and we want to be curious, right? We all have created wounds. We have all, been on the receiving ends of wounds, of harm that has happened in the world. But when we get this and can create this brave space, we can start to hopefully talk about some of this difficult stuff without shutting down or attacking each other. And then this last step in the equation is really to lightly facilitate. So here, you get to do it lightly if you did the rest of the pieces right. Really, you're holding space so people can connect with one another. It is not about you. You are gathering this conversation, not driving it. And letting people, always like talk to each other in this conversation, not always look back to you when after they have a thought, right? But to kind of see each other more deeply. And to do that, part of it is you're going to want to set up questions that are open-ended, that are honest, that are judgment-free. And instead of asking something like, don't you think that's wrong? You might ask, like, what experiences have shaped how you see that issue? You need to ask questions that you literally don't know an answer to. If you're asking a question grounded in a belief that you're holding, then you've got a clear answer, right? But if you're asking a question that's bigger than that, then you can start to really generate something beautiful. Um, and allowing for that space to happen, that silence to happen, can be a really gorgeous thing too. And what we've seen in my experience when I facilitated these conversations at various stages of my life is that something sort of magical happens in the room. You hear people's stories, not just their ideas, not just the headlines. I will say I've never facilitated one of these conversations personally, and I hope this doesn't scare anybody off, but I've never facilitated one of them without literally being brought to tears with the beauty of the humans in that room and this rare opportunity we get to kind of go deep and to see each other and to feel seen by other people. It feels like the greatest, most unusual, most antithetical to social media gift that we can possibly be given. So that's just some of what we've learned, Maz. I'm curious to hear from you. What would you add to that list? What else can you do to have these kinds of conversations?
Yeah, I mean, I think some of it happens even before you're setting the stage, which is the trust piece and the relationship piece. And I mean, that can only happen over time, right? We know that progress only happens at the speed of trust in so many ways. I just adapted that a little bit, but and so I do think trust, and I think it's hard to come to these conversations if you're not sure where everyone else is, or what is the intention of this. And so I've always found that it's important to know people's intentions before you come in. So at least you're on some page of like, okay, like I'm not going to move them in this way, but at least we're going to come together around these specific things, which is what got them in the room in the first place. So I think trust is really important. The other thing I think is, I mean, just to kind of echo what you're already saying, Emily, which is I think it's important that we think beyond current paradigms and beyond the way that the current debates of certain things have been laid out for us. Again, I think oftentimes it puts us in a place where there's false dichotomies, false choices. And, how do we as a society and and it starts in these one-to-one and group conversations of how we lean in towards complexity, how we hold nuance, and recognize that again, it's not black and white. And therefore like leaning in towards each other's humanity a little bit more. And then I think the third thing is, and this is maybe sort of a after all of this is how do we find common purpose with each other? How do we disagree on so many things, but where can we find that commonality? Where can we find that common purpose? Because for us at Over Zero, so much of it is not just about these one-time conversations, but the relationship over time, because it's the relationships that are the glue of our society. Um, and relationships are built in trust, and those relationships need to be able to sustain us over time, over decades. Those relationships are relationships we then like hand down to our children to teach them how you relate to other people who may not agree with, these are all things that, are generational. And so I think it's about eventually how you build those relationships over time through conversation and through building something together and figuring out what that might be.
Mm. So here's the hope because we're doing this kind of work. And you said something, Maz. You said, how do we move people from anger to hope to action? And that like has stuck with me since I heard you say it. And so I think the what you said earlier, the step that we're missing is the hope piece. And so I want to hear from you, Maz, what's giving you hope right now?
Um, what's giving me hope is that I really, and my 5-year-old asked me this like a month or so ago. He asked me, are there more good people in the world than bad people?
Mm,
And, obviously, yes.
Mhm.
And, I think that most of us want something different. Most of us don't accept the status quo, and most of us want new ways to be with each other, relate to each other, and see and be in the world. And I think that what we are planting now is what generations from now will benefit from, because we are planting a new world and a new way of being through things that seem seemingly small. And I think that that's what grounds me every day, is that, building a new world from wreckage is really hard.
Mhm.
But that's what we are doing. So
Mhm.
yeah.
Mhm. I would say for me, besides this beautiful weather we're having in Brooklyn, New York today,
It's 78 people right here in Brooklyn.
giving me all the hope. I would say, reflecting, like just looking, the hope that's living in my heart is, looking at my students, and just looking at this, regardless of what's happening in the world, that they're still thriving, they're still wanting connections, they're still wanting to learn, they're still present. There's still a level of trust, right? Because in order for I feel like anyone to be willing to listen to what you're saying or want to learn from you, there has to be a level of trust. And seeing that gives me hope, for next generation, and that it's possible for folks to be able to really come across difference. Because I have I was just telling Emily, my classroom is completely diverse. I have a woman who's in her 40s in my classroom who asked me like, "Hey, how old do you think I am?" And I was like, "I don't know, 25." And she's like, "Yeah, thanks. My oldest son is actually 25." So just knowing that, that you can bring people together who care about an issue, who want to learn from each other, are willing to be open with one another, and are really willing to receive what you have to share. That brings me all the hope in the world. What about you, Emily?
I went to the No Kings protest this past weekend with my family. And my girlfriend and I blended families, so 4 kids all in, and the kids like were doing that kid thing, like, why do we have to go? And I'm like, listen, do you like freedom? Do you like democracy? Guess what? You have to fight for it, right? And like giving them this whole diatribe before we left. I got them to sit down and make their signs, which they were like kind of into. They had some good slogans, for little kids. Uh, my oldest was wrote no kings, yes sushi. my my youngest was like, we already have a queen. It's my mom. It was
that
cute.
was amazing.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that
that was
felt
awesome.
special,
Yeah.
right? And then we get to this protest, and they're like, "How long are we going to stay? How long are we going to stay? How long are we going to stay?" Right? And they get there, and they are like on the corner with their signs, surrounded by like every woman in her 70s in the entire area, as far as I could tell, right? It was this totally intergenerational event. And shout out to our elders for rolling up yet again to save our democracy. And the kids did not want to leave. Like they loved it. They did not want to leave. They were chanting, they were dancing, right? We were in the middle of New Jersey at my girlfriend's house, in Trump country. So there was a number of like Trump paraphernalia filled cars zooming past. There were people like Trump voters literally flicking my kids off. And they were like, "What is that?" And I was like, "Well, that is not personal. It is not about you. It is also free speech." They're like, "Can we do that?" I'm like, "Nope. No, we cannot. That is not the world we are building, friend." And and anyway, I just think, like, we got the right ingredients. We got good people. The good people who were good people 5 years ago are still out there being good people. We outnumber, I don't even believe in bad people necessarily, but I think we outnumber people with bad ideas. And I think we got it going on. And Erin, you were the one that taught me that, if you
Mm.
have sustained, if 3.5% of the population engages in sustained resistance, that's all it takes to win, right? That's all it takes for our collective liberation. So, we haven't won yet, but we're on the path. We're on a very long and circuitous journey towards it. And that's given me hope.
Mm.
I'll just clarify and say it was at least 3.5%. And
Okay, thanks
and
for
I'll say
clarification with
it
the
was,
data.
I'll credit Erica Chenoweth, political
Yeah,
scientist, who figured that out. But yeah, I mean, and I think the key that we also oftentimes miss is the sustained piece, right? Is that it's not just one protest, although that helps, galvanize and move us to the next thing. But it's are you doing this, all the time? Have you incorporated it into your life? Are you making choices so that, um, we can, um, we can bring more people to our side and, and bring more people in. And I mean, but the point of that is you can't win with a minority. You have to win by, or a small minority. You have to, the way you bring people in, the point is that you have to continuously bring people in, right?
Mhm.
And I think in the US, it's something like 11 million people is 3.5%. Don't quote me on that. There, and again, it's not just a single day of work. It's continuous work. And
Mhm.
so that is our work, is to bring more and more people into the
Mhm.
work of, you know, realignment and team human and safety
human. You
and
heard
all
it
of
here,
that.
folks. Go have a conversation with your neighbor.
Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
Well, here's to bringing more people in. Thank you, Mass, for joining us today. We appreciate you. Folks who are watching or gonna watch this, if the conversation resonated with you, please go and check out Right to Be. Go check out Over Zero. Check out the work that we're doing. If there are trainings potentially that you want to check out, you can check us out, right2be.org. And if you wanted to learn about facilitating discussions across difference, we also have some work around that as well. Over Zero does some work around that. So please check both of our organizations out. And this series is called Not Today because harm may be real, but silence doesn't get the final word.
We've got your back, folks. Hang in there. Till